Simon, perhaps, it seems likely that by God's grace was saved. And maybe even other members of his family. The reason for this assumption, which I think is a good assumption, is that Mark mentions Simon, and when he describes Simon of Cyrene, he says in Mark chapter 15, verse 21, the father of Rufus and Alexander. Why in the world would Mark record that? I mean, when you look at other people listed in Scriptures, you don't usually record who their sons are unless there's a significant reason. And I believe every source I checked on this says the reason is, they were all in agreement on the reason for why Simon's sons are mentioned by Mark in Mark 15. The reason being they were very well known to the church. The church to which Mark is writing, they know Rufus and Alexander because Rufus and Alexander are members of that church. Rufus and Alexander, perhaps, saved by God's grace. There are Rufus and Alexander both mentioned by the Apostle Paul. The same Rufus and Alexander, not certain, but a very big perhaps. Alexander is mentioned in Acts chapter 19, verse 33. Alexander, a Jew, which would also be in accordance with Simon's son, was with Paul in Ephesus. You remember in Ephesus where there's a mob scene and they're wanting to rip Paul to shreds? Well, before they could get to Paul, they got to a man named Alexander, and they were going to rip him to shreds. Could that be the son of Simon of Cyrene? Perhaps. There's also a Rufus mentioned, and listen to this. Romans chapter 16, verse 13, the Apostle Paul writing at the end of the letter, you know how Paul does his greetings? Well, he says this, greet Rufus, a chosen man in the Lord, and also greet his mother, who is also mine. He's not saying Rufus is my brother, but what he is saying is Rufus is elect, a chosen man in the Lord. Greet him and greet his mother because she's like a mother to me. Now, if that's the same Rufus, who would Rufus's mother be? That would be Simon of Cyrene's wife. And so do you see how God causes all things to work together for good? Who wants to be pressed into service to carry a criminal's cross? A bloody, filthy cross of a man you don't even know. Who wants to be pressed into service for that? Simon didn't. But could it be that in that choice of him to carry that cross, God had something spiritual far beyond anything Simon could have ever dreamed? The salvation of Simon, the salvation of Simon's wife, the salvation of Simon's two sons. When you consider these things, in one sense, it's mind-boggling to think of the sovereignty of God over these minutest of details.